Hello, my name is Tezikiah Gabriel, and I am from Pathways to Peace. Today, it is my honor and delight to be able to be interviewing Rich Shealey. And Rich, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tez. I'm really glad to be here today and looking forward to sharing with you.
That sounds perfect. So, Rich is founder and chief servant of the Optimal Human Global Community, a community of evolved and evolving humans of all ethnicities who are committed to doing their part to end racism as an integral part of the human experience. Also, Rich is the creator of Heart Transformed, Ending Racism, a learning system that helps people end their journey with racism, awaken to the fullness of their humanity, and live consciously beyond the constraints of race, racism, and white supremacy. So clearly, Rich, we are just honored and delighted to have you here because, of course, your work has never been more important, more relevant, more meaningful than it is today, as all of us around the globe are challenged with the opportunity to end racism, which is a lived reality for many, but certainly others are now waking up to that reality and that injustice. So I'm going to just be asking you some questions, Rich, if you're okay with that.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. So majority populations around the world are appearing to wake up to the injustice of racism. So what would you like to say or add to the current dialogue?
Well, first I want to say we should be careful, and we should be patient. It's important, critically important, to understand that we live in a societal context that has successfully maintained income inequality, the false hypothesis of race, and racism institutionalized for hundreds of years. And it is successful in this because our societal context is a toxic, self-reinforcing, negative feedback loop that is highly elastic. And what I mean by that is what we see in the streets today and in the positive responses we're getting from many authority figures, political figures, is very positive. And it looks like change is imminent. But we should be extremely careful with that because our system is resilient and elastic. It expands to absorb the energy of change, whatever that is. And it expands for a time to absorb it until it is figured out how to effectively manage that change and return to its roots of race, which is a false hypothesis, racism as an institution, and underneath that, the core driver, income inequality. So we want to be very careful. This system is so saturated with these concepts in every aspect of itself. And it is always looking to return and protect these core dynamics. So even though it looks positive, we want to be very, very careful. And we want to be aware that this is primarily an unconscious process. This is not primarily a conscious process. The social scientists say that human beings operate as much as 95% or more from things they value unconsciously. And they're only conscious 5% of the time, if they're lucky, if they're some of the more independent ones. So this is important to think about and be careful. And this is why we have the current president we have, because of the unconscious value process and the unconscious behavior that people exhibit. So we want to be very careful because we're still vulnerable to this, despite what we see that looks so favorable and we're all so excited about.
Thank you for that, Rich. So what I hear you saying, of course, much so eloquently and completely, is that it's wonderful to be hopeful, and yet we need to be aware that this is not the sort of change that can happen overnight.
No.
Given the complexity, the deep roots, the prevalence globally as well as nationally, that patience and I think retaining that hope over time and putting action to that as well. So thank you so much for that response. I wonder if, because this is the very heart of your work, I wonder if we could begin in understanding your work by talking about kind of the origins of it. When and how did this amazing work you're doing begin? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I believe I was born to this work. I was born an intuitive empath. Now, it took me most of my life to understand what that meant. But as I said earlier, we live in a closed loop, a toxic negative feedback loop. And because I am intuitive and empathic, a highly sensitive person, all of my life, I have been able to source intelligence and information outside of the loop. So I was always receiving that intelligence, although early in my life, I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand why things would come into my awareness without my thinking about it or without my reading about it, but something would come into my awareness as being true. And I would have a very strong visceral sense that it was true, but I had nothing on the rational side of life to back it up. An example of that would be in the late 70s and early 80s, I was a young officer at Continental Bank in Chicago. And I was one of the people who was doing well and had adjusted well to that environment. But as the other young minorities were coming into that environment, after they had been there for about 6 months, I would see that there was a deadness in their eyes. They had been defeated by the racism that was in the environment. So we created a weekend workshop that we call Success Strategies. And as we tried to talk with these people and to help them develop coping skills that would allow them to be successful in that environment, one of the things I noticed is that I would have insights about people that were more clear of the information about them than they had about themselves. And I didn't understand what was happening or how I could do it. I just know that's is what happened. What I later understood was that I was reading the information that was in the energy fields that surrounded their physical bodies. I didn't know I was doing that, but that was a gift that I have had. But that's what being an intuitive empath is all about. It's about being able to source the information from energy, whether it's the energy that's around a person or energy in general, energy of the universe. And so that's the source of my work, because I always have been a lover of people, all people. Have always had a keen interest in people who were different than me, and always wondered why they were different. I'd like to know more about that difference, and how could I create relationships with people, and I've always been able to do that. Even people that were completely unlike me, or people who were completely adverse to me. So my work has always been part of my life, and it's always been about helping human beings discover how to be more human. And over time, that evolved into the optimal human. And what does it mean to be an optimal human? Now, what that means to me is an optimal human is someone who has decided to adopt values that compel them to bring forth their greatness as human beings and reach out to others and help others bring forth their greatness at the same time. Not one or the other, but both at the same time. And that then leads to the oneness, the one human family. And that's what being an optimal human is all about, is moving themselves toward the oneness of the one human family and helping others to do that at the same time.
So thank you so much for that, Rich. Of course, I so admire you and the work you do. I think you're one of the best thinkers. And of course, that I resonate with your work,
Yeah.
and recognize it as a path to unity.
Yes.
And so just thank you for that. So I'd like to get a little bit deeper into kind of your work itself. So how would you describe your work to someone who knows nothing about it? Just take a few moments and explore with us kind of the nature of your work.
Well, on the opening slide, you identified me as a light worker. So I'm all about the energy of humanity. And one of the things that is just starting to come into the science of who we are as human beings is the energy of human beings, the human biofield. And it is not fully set forth scientifically as yet, but they're working towards it. But the light workers, people who have similar skills like you and I, the light workers would not be uncomfortable with the idea that our physical being represents approximately 12.5% of who we are as humans. And our energy portion represents about 87.5%. Now, those are not distinct pieces, separate, that you have to integrate. You're already one unit that gets represented as physical, and people think that they're solely what we call physical, but it is all energy, as Einstein taught us. Everything is energy. It's just that what we think about as physical is energy that is compacted. Now, because of thinking that there is a division between our physical and our energy, that then gives us a sense of separation. And because our energy is not working together with our physical, it lowers our vibration. And that then creates all kinds of problems for us, including health problems, mental problems, and so on. Now, here is the major flaw of the false hypothesis of race. Race is intended, and was intended in the beginning, to divide human groups. And it is the major division in human groups across the globe. Now, what that means is that the energy vibration of the whole human family is lowered because people accept into their consciousness the false hypothesis of race. And people don't understand that is a false hypothesis. It was initially introduced into humanity for the purpose of bringing about income inequality. When you think back to the days of the families that were given these large plots of land by the King of England, and they had the challenge under contract to farm these lands and produce exportable crops that could be returned back to England, and they needed farm labor. The source of wealth in those days was large tracts of land. And so in order to farm those lands, they needed to create a labor pool. And in order to create that labor pool, they identified Africans, because Africans already had the agricultural skills from their life experience in Africa, and they looked different. So they were likely foibles available to be exploited. But race was a term that was used to separate Africans as a group from so-called whites. So people need to understand that that is a false, there never has been anything like race. And the equalizer between human beings is not our biology. The equalizer is our energy, because the energy is the same. The energy foundation, the baseline of what a human being is about, is not about their biology, but their energy. And that energy then can be expressed in many different ways. It can be expressed with a different skin color. It can be expressed with an alternative lifestyle. It can be expressed as a person who wants to dominate others, a person who wants to love and support others. It can be expressed in an infinite number of ways, but it is the same energy from which that expression is derived. And that is our equalizer. So when we're looking and when we talk about things like racial reconciliation or racial equality, that's a mistake. That's that's it will appear on the surface to be helpful, but you really have got to get to what really equalizes and makes human beings the same. And what that is our energy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rich. There's just so much truth in what you speak. So, so when you look out into the future, and I know as the prophet that you are, that you probably believe that you won't see the end result of your work, but you continue to lay the foundation and the pathway for people to experience their ultimate humanity and to come together as one. So, what do you see in your vision for the results of your work? When you look out into the future, what do you see?
Well, one of the things that I hope for, one of the things that I hope for is that we will begin to step by step build communities of energy consciousness and energy power so that these communities don't have to be overly large. I used to think that you needed to try to build a community of 1 million or something like that. But I no longer think you need that many. I think a reasonable group, and this has been proven scientifically, that a significant group of energy evolved and evolving people meditating intentionally, seeking to benefit other humans in accessing higher vibrations of their humanity, that process works, that humans can be impacted in their energy bodies favorably toward optimal humanity, whether they know it or not, and whether they are intending to receive it or not. A prime example of this on a small scale was the situation in England where you had a clash between so-called far-right whites and Africans in London who were clashing. And one of the far-right people was injured in that process. And there was an African-derived man who picked him up, put him on his back, and carried him to safety in the midst of all of this hullabaloo that was going on. And he did that because there was a connection between his heart and his mind. And he connected to the humanity of this person who was trying to harm him and carried him to safety. Now that's on a 1-to-1 scale. But imagine the same kind of energetic power if you had thousands who were simply meditating for the benefit of others. So that's one of the visions that I have about the work that I am involved in to end racism, is to use the energy that we all are connected to benefit those who we can benefit just by being aware of what we can do.
I love that, tapping the power that we all inherently have for
Yes,
the good of all.
yes.
That's great. So my last question is really, because we want to capture anything that you'd like to tell us. Is there anything more you'd like to say, or anything more that you'd like us to know about you, about your work, or about anything?
What comes into my heart? What comes into my heart when you ask that question is to help people understand that this is not a challenge only for people who are non-white. This is a challenge for all humans to discover the wonderful blessing of oneness that awaits them when they choose themselves. Think about your children, your grandchildren, and their grandchildren. What world do you want them to live in and benefit from? Do you want them to live in the divided world of chaos, hate, stress, illness, early death? Do you want them to live in this toxic, negative feedback loop that we're compelled to live in? Or do you want them to live in the world that the universe and God intends for human beings to live in? If you want the world of beauty and creativity and oneness that is the promise of our humanity, then you must act like that's what you want.
Thank you so much again, Rich. On behalf of Pathways to Peace and from the bottom of our hearts, we're so grateful for your partnership and your wisdom. From me personally, I think I can certainly speak on behalf of myself, but perhaps others, that I am a better person and an inspired, hopeful, and more enlightened human being as a result of your willingness to share your wisdom and your work. So I am sure there are others out there that would like to have more information about you, Rich, and about your work. So let me take a minute here and see if I can pull up some of that for you. And so if you are interested in hearing more from Rich, knowing more about Rich, we have some opportunities coming up. And then I will turn it over to Rich to add anything that isn't kind of here currently. And so we have World Unity Week coming up. I think many of the people watching this video are aware of this. It's starting June 20th through the 28th. and there are speakers from around the world who will be talking about peace building, peace, world unity. And so Pathways to Peace is going to be hosting a workshop there, and we're hoping that Rich will come in and provide another interview or presentation. So we will be announcing that date and time when we know, but certainly know that Rich and Pathways to Peace will be engaged in World Unity Week. And then I'm particularly excited, Rich, about our healing talks. And so this is something Rich and I have been talking about and pondering for a while. And it certainly seems as if the time is really right. So these healing talks are going to take place at 12:30 Central Time. And that means that it's 1:30 Eastern Standard Time and 10:30 Pacific daytime, daylight time. And we will be promoting these healing talks as well. They're going to be short talks that are going to follow the 12 noon peace wave for 30 minutes for 7 Mondays beginning July 6th. So if you want more information from that, we do expect to be getting that out in our newsletters and our other communications, but you can always contact me, Tez, T-E-Z, T as in Tom, E-Z as in zebra, at pathwaystopeace.org, or you can contact Rich. And you can contact Rich about the healing talks or anything else, right, Rich?
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
here's Rich's website, www.theoptimalhuman.org, and his email address at rich@theoptimalhuman.org. And again, you know that www.pathwaystopeace.org is the Pathways to Peace website as well. So Rich, is there anything more that we should include about upcoming work or what you'd like others to know about?
Well, hopefully, I never seem to come to the end of writing this book, but hopefully I'll be able to write this book by the end of this year, because I can see from what I see in the streets that people need it very badly, and many of the topics that would be discussed in the book will be discussed in these healing talks, and also just to encourage people that the problems that we see, the problems that we experience, can be resolved, that it is possible to resolve these problems. And what is on the other side of the resolving of these problems is joy, peace, robust health, and great creativity for all.
Thank you, Rich. We're really looking forward to your book, and we'll be promoting that as well when the time is right. And so thank you for that, in addition to all of the other wisdom that you have that we're hoping to tap in the upcoming months and years. So once again, thank you, anyone who's watching this video. We hope that you'll get in touch with Rich or myself, Tezikiah Gabriel, at Pathways to Peace. And any closing remarks, Rich?
Peace and love. Peace and love.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And peace and love to all of you out there. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.